So, welcome everybody to the 15th AGS Weekly Dialogue. In this series, we get to know better our members and their change-making initiatives in a question and answer format. In the first 20 minutes, I will have a chat with our guests and ask him some questions. In the next 20 minutes, we will open to the floor and let anyone present ask our guests any questions that they may have. The first two segments will be recorded for those who are not able to be with us here today. The last segment will be 20 minutes chat with GM, where anyone here can ask Vincent any questions that they may have or raise ideas or feedback to him directly. This segment will not be recorded. Now let's get started. Our guest for today is Bill Bannear. He describes himself as somebody who does all sorts of things, but still doesn't know where he's going, and his superpowers include connecting dots that may or may not be there, taking a stab at things when no one is really sure, and keeping people calm enough to help it stick. You can ask him anything. What he didn't say is that he's the managing director of ThinkPlace Singapore, where he solves complex problems by bringing together diverse groups of people. And he works with whole agencies, divisions, branches, and non-government organizations to design strategy, policy, and governance. He is consistently highly rated by workshop participants as a creative, engaging facilitator who balances discipline, flexibility, and sensitivity. An interesting nugget about him is that his grandfather, Henry Wardlaw, was the project director of Singapore's first version of what is now known as the URA Master Plan. So thank you, Bill, for agreeing to be our guest today. I have lots of questions for you, but let's start with the basics. You there, Bill?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, so when I first read what you sent over, it didn't make sense to me until I started to dig a bit more and find out what is it you actually do. But I think I'd like you to explain it. So imagine you're talking to a 10-year-old and they ask you, what do you do? How do you answer that?
Well, basically, I get groups of people who kind of all have an interest in a common issue and then help them design things together. That's basically what I do.
Okay. Can you give some examples of what you've done?
Yeah, sure. So that can be anything from designing a new government service or improving a government service. So just recently we worked with PUB, for example, around the water service. So, you know, how you pay for water and how you get water. So they're introducing smart water meters, and we were looking at with that change in technology and with how society has changed, like what does a good future water service look like? And short answer to that is, for a lot of people, invisible is good. I really don't want to have to think about my water. For other people, it's a cost that really matters to them, and they want information and the ability. We looked at rental flats and the ability maybe to pay even on a weekly basis for some people, because small amounts regularly are better for people with issues with their income. Whereas for other people, maybe they'd like to pay it quarterly or once a year and just deal with it sort of once and not worry about it. So, we look at sort of different human needs, and often when we're designing government services, we're thinking about the balance of, how that impacts different people in different parts of society. Another different kind of example is the future of the Australian renewable energy industry. So we brought together 300 stakeholders, everyone from the people doing solar panels and wind farms, to coal generators, to the people who control the wires and the poles, the people who do the retail to the customers. So the entire electricity sector, basically. And we went through a really large-scale foresighting exercise for them to say, what does their industry look like in 20 years' time? How to drive that shift to renewables effectively, and then kind of working backwards from that desired future, what are the sort of problems that we really have to solve in the here and now to kind of make that true? And then running targeted innovation labs, getting groups together to kind of figure out how to crack those different problems that are exposed. And so that was done with a government sponsor who kind of co-invested to create like a portfolio of experimental projects to try and drive forwards the future of renewable energy. It can, like at the moment, we're working on designing a trusted information service for women in Myanmar, which is a very strange project because it was commissioned before the coup. So we're in the very weird position of doing a human-centered design project where we can't talk to any of the humans involved, and we're literally banned from talking to them because politically it would be too sensitive. And also they've got better things on their mind right now than talking to us about some fanciful future service. So yeah, it can be all sorts of different things, designing services. It can be about changes to policy. We've spent a whole lot of time over the last 4 years thinking about divorce in Singapore. So we've worked with the family justice courts to try and understand how to redesign the process and experience at FJC. Everything from the air conditioner is too cold and everyone's sitting there freezing to if I'm hanging around waiting for my court appearance with my kids, is there food? Because there's nothing worse than a screaming child while you're waiting to go face your ex-husband in court. To actually thinking about how to change the way that justice policy works for more therapeutic outcomes. To changes in the law. So, the recent change to introduce no-fault divorce as a fifth pillar. We had a bit of a hand in that in terms of community consultation and suggestions from our earlier projects. So we've worked with MSF a lot around changes around social policy, citizen design of the pre-divorce support portal with MSF. So basically all of these things are examples. We call it co-design. How do you bring together the different people involved in that system and actually get them as active participants in design? And a lot of that is about balancing power. So how do you open up spaces for vulnerable people and marginalised groups to talk and be heard and have power in that design process? Often it's like for government people, it's like how do you get them into the right headspace to be open to hearing those voices? How do you overcome their own fear factor of opening up Pandora's box and suddenly being overwhelmed and not being able to deal with it? So there's like a lot of mindset changes that we're trying to do. I often think in all of our projects there's a design challenge, but 50% of it is the mindset challenge of getting people to engage in that design process in a way that works. Yeah. So yeah, there's plenty of other stuff, but that's enough talking for now. I'll let you ask more questions.
Yeah, I'm super interested because okay, so how do you get all these different stakeholders together? Are you the one who has to bring them together, or have they already been brought together by the time they approach you to facilitate this?
I think in the past it was a lot. They would be being brought together by someone. We usually call them the voice of intent. So our old model, we talked about 4 voices of design. There's a voice of intent who's kind of the originator of the project, who often for us is coming from government because they have a mandate, they have authority, they have convening power. They've got a fuzzy idea of the change that they want to see, and they want to open that up to the voice of experience, which is the people who actually experience whatever is being designed, which could be the citizen, it could be staff for an internal organisational design. It could be particular groups in society who get really affected by a particular policy or a service. So the voice of intent, the voice of experience, and then the third is the voice of expertise, which is people who have deep knowledge about something. Could be a technology voice, for example, who can advise often on what's possible and maybe what's not possible. So they can be a voice of constraint, or they can be a voice of opportunity. But people with sort of deeper knowledge to add to the quality of the design. Because good co-design is not just giving people what they want. It's like Steve Jobs said with Apple, you can't just ask customers what they want and give it to them because they don't always know. So it's a very important thing to know what citizens and residents and people need and want, but what they tell you is not necessarily actually what they need. Like there's a thought. So bringing together those voices, actually going through deliberation, going through design conversation with a coalition of these groups actually helps to reveal what are we really trying to do here. And then we fill in a 4th box. So intent, experience, expertise. We come in as the voice of design who helps kind of broker and facilitate those groups. That model actually we don't like anymore, but we haven't made a new one yet. But it kind of gives you a sense of where we're coming from. In answer to your question though, that voice of intent in the past has often been the one doing the convening. But increasingly I'm finding the need for us to do our own convening. And I mean, that's a reason why we're a member of A Good Space as well. because it's more people who we can convene with, and more connections. Because I think the future is really about ecosystems, and all of the different people in it, and making ecosystems conscious of their own existence, and therefore able to exercise their own intent. And that's why I say our old model we're actually increasingly not liking, because that idea of voice of intent as usually government intent mandate, a lot of problems with that. So actually now increasingly intent can come from all across, and there's a much more sophisticated approach we can take to forming that intent in the first place, that then starts to shape up the ecosystem and reveal it, which I think is very common language and common intent for what a lot of people in a good space are trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, we've also have our listening living labs to work with the migrant worker sector and the low income sector. So this sounds like what you described sounds like what A Good Space is also trying to do. Not just A Good Space, but there are other organizations that are also trying to do something similar. Why do you think more organizations like Good Space is trying to do this process of getting different stakeholders to talk about certain issues and make change?
Well, two answers. One quick one is because we can. I think increasingly there's a sense that we can do that, and it's much easier to organise now with online tools. So the ability of anyone to coordinate and organise groups of people is a lot better than it used to be. Like, you think if you were doing this 30 years ago, and you literally had to wait for people to be by their fixed landline to have a conversation, compared to WhatsApping and stuff now, like the power of convening and coordinating is an order of magnitude higher than it was 30 years ago. So there's a reason why lots of convening and coordinating stuff is happening from all over the place, because we can. But I think the other way of answering that question, it comes back to a kind of core aspect of how we think about design, which is at ThinkPlace, we're always designing in complex systems. So they're always complex, big human systems that usually involve government, setting rules and regulations and policy, industry and private sector with sort of vested interests, communities, people, society as a whole, with all sorts of needs and desires and wants. And when you're trying to drive change in all of that, by definition, you can never understand everything. So this idea that you kind of do this sort of intensive research and kind of understand what needs to be done and then do it is bullshit, basically. So what is much more effective is bringing together all of those different perspectives and getting them to kind of contribute their jigsaw pieces to the overall puzzle, and start to sense make and understand what's going on in all of that, and then sense your way to what are some interventions that could work. Let's try them, see what happens, and that's a long-term process with a lot of iteration involved to get. It's kind of evolving ideas and solutions out of the system to kind of see what works. I mean, that's a great conceptual story. What does that actually feel like in projects? Well, usually it feels like it never quite meets the mark for that, but we keep trying. We keep trying to get closer and closer to that ideal way of how we're all working.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that also. So when you go through this whole process, what does the process look like? Does it take how many sessions? Does it take 1 session, 10 sessions, or is there a template process you follow, or you have to rebuild it each time?
No, there's no template, and the number of clients who ask us to give us the agenda, as if like every workshop we do has a templated agenda behind it, it shits me off no end. It's always bespoke, but there are patterns in it. So we have a whole design system that we've been using for 15, 20 years that talks about kind of 5 stages. So think of this though not as like a template, but more like it's sort of the chord book from which you can create your song. It's sort of like the equivalent of the 12-bar blues. It's like a pattern that kind of makes sense, but you can riff off it a lot and improvise around it. An intent phase, which is usually bringing people together up front to kind of go, why are we doing this? What outcome? What's the need? What's the outcome we want? What kind of change do we think we're trying to drive here? So that's like a critical first phase. It's a little bit different, in design thinking, common models like the Stanford D School, they start with empathize. technically there's a sort of framing a brief before you get to that empathize stage, but our model very deliberately starts with intent. Have a conversation about intent and what the hell you're trying to do, and get that right, because most design projects fail because of lack of intent, or lack of understood and aligned intent. So that's the most critical phase for me, is intent. Then we move into explore, which is really trying to, from that intent, like really going out and exploring and sensing. And that's a lot of ethnography, understanding the humans involved, mapping out systems. There's a variety of kind of sense-making techniques to try and understand what's going on now. And from that, looking for where are the sort of real issues, so problem framing, or where are the opportunities where we think there's something that can be created and value can be generated, which then leads into innovation, which is kind of idea generation. Okay, what can be done? A lot of that is about trying to increase the creativity of problem solving and response. Then moving into evaluate, which is sort of testing, prototyping, testing, trying that stuff out. And then moving into formulate, which is blueprint that, what's the implementation pathway, how would you actually do it? And then moving from there into more detailed layers of design to get to an actual thing out there. So that often dovetails with agile methodologies that then can run that into implementation approaches where you actually build stuff and make it and keep going and testing. But yeah, intent, explore, innovate, evaluate, and formulate are kind of like our touchstone kind of approach to projects. Is it one session? Is it 10? You can run through that whole thing in one session if it's a small problem, or more realistically, it's like, what has the client got time for? Or what have the people involved got time for? There's a big difference. In Australia, that project that we did on the renewable energy industry, the foresighting approach alone was 12 weeks with about 7 full-day workshops, and there were about 200 or 300 people coming along. So that's 7 full days of workshop that the industry in Australia committed to come to and gave their full and undivided attention during that time. I've never seen that happen in Singapore. Time is money. Efficiency is the primary driver. It's rare to get a full-day workshop ever in Singapore. The single biggest thing I had to get my head around coming from Australia to Singapore was that no one wanted a full-day workshop. Whereas in Australia, it's like, well, if it's a serious problem, and why wouldn't you give it a full day? And the chopping and changing and distraction of like packing everything in 4 hours here and there is very counterproductive. But that's the reality of, in Singapore, the expectation is, what can you do in 2 hours? What can you do in 3 hours? It's not wrong, actually, but you just have to understand what you can achieve in that. One of our favoured formats actually was what we called a think camp, which was a 2-day workshop. And the reason for a 2-day workshop is it let you have a sleep in the middle. And, when you sleep overnight, your subconscious compiles everything that happened to you today. And some of the thinking happens while you sleep, which is why you suddenly wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with a solution. Some people need a notepad by the side of their bed to kind of write that down so they can go back to sleep. So the 2-day think camp is a really nice format because it's like the first day. I'll give you a tangible example. We were working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we were trying to do this design project around how to create a bulk food vending machine. And the idea was if we can create a low-cost vending machine that can vend food in low-income communities like the slums of Nairobi, which is Kibera, which is where we did some of the field research for this and the testing. We could save money out of packaging, so take cost out of the supply chain by removing the need for packaging and to do everything in bulk, and instead vend it through these machines that could guarantee sort of food safety and quality, and put the savings into increased nutrition, so fortification and nutrition. And we ended up with a really cool thing of actually the machine could be doing an assessment of the people in front of it and actually tailoring fortification to the person in front of them, which would be really novel. And it also saves money because you've got to put 3 times the fortification into the food products because they sit in the shelf for 3 months and the nutrients deteriorate. So there's a few reasons why they thought this might be a good idea, but it was a moonshot. It was a moonshot facilitation, really, because there was no sense that it would work. Anyway, long story short, we kicked off with a 2-day workshop in Paris where we got a whole bunch of the world's leading vending machine and food people along to And the first day was a complete write-off. It was like a bunch of experts throwing stuff at each other, having debates, academic debates, talking too much, getting really lost in like how they were trying to define something. But they kind of had to go through that process of on the first day getting lost. And there's a great model and design called the Design Squiggle by Damien Newman, which basically says that design starts going around in circles and in a complete loss and confusion to start with before you start finding what's interesting and getting sense out of that. Deeply uncomfortable for a lot of people. So we had...
That's like the explore phase, right?
Yeah, it is. So the first day was very much this getting lost in the squiggle. But then the next morning we just said, righto, let's get in 3 giant cardboard boxes. We're going to form you up into 3 teams. You had yesterday to just talk shit and get lost together. Now, here's your box. Now, we don't even know that this vending machine is going to be a classic box vending machine, but whatever. Get making, guys. And you've got half a day to kind of create your vending machine and tell us a story about how it's going to work and pitch it, pressure's on, go. The act of making, the act of turning from debating and my point winning over your point to turning into a making conversation makes all the difference. And we see this time and time again. I think it's the difference between deliberation and design. Deliberation is very useful. So it's not like you shouldn't have deliberation. But deliberation is like a debate. It's really contesting views. Design is about making something. And it's a different part of the brain that gets used. I don't have any literature to back that up, but I'm pretty sure it's a different part of the brain that we use. There's also this notion of there is, as a group, there is now a kind of third space in between all of us. Maybe it's a good space where we're all creating something together, and it kind of externalizes. It's no longer my opinion versus your opinion. It's a thing that's externalized from us that we're all contributing to and making. And that's what we got them to on the start of the second day, which then led to breakthroughs and really like getting tangible. And by the end of the 2 days, we got somewhere. If it had been a one-day workshop, it would have been completely and utterly useless. But the ability to kind of fail dramatically on the first day, go home, sleep, think, have dinner, talk to each other, get to know each other a bit, come in the next day and have another go, you just get so much more out of it. I don't think I've ever had a Singaporean client willing to do that.
Okay, we actually, in Singapore, we do actually have weekend workshops. Like for example, I attended one under the Catholic Church under like marriage encounter kind of thing. So you go in on, it starts on Saturday, but you go in on Friday night and then you end on Sunday. So it's amazing how much you can pack into one weekend.
Yeah, it sounds more like a kind of hackathon kind of thing.
Okay, so I've got so many more questions to ask you because you have raised a lot of interesting things. But I also want to open to the floor to see if anyone here has any question to ask you. So members of the audience, if any one of you would like to ask Bill any question, please just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
I have a question.
Yes,
hi, Bill. I want to know if like you think some people are better suited to become facilitators, because you were talking about sense making just now, right? And I just feel like it's such like a intangible thing. Like, how do you like go into a room and then like make sense of stuff? So I feel like I just wanted to ask, like, what do you think makes someone a good sense maker?
Yeah, I think it does require a certain kind of person. I mean, there's one school of thought that says everyone can be a designer, and they probably can, but I think when we're talking about facilitation specifically, it's a bit different. So one thing that we became aware of doing a lot of big consortium type facilitation with lots of different people involved is the ability to suppress your own ego and understand that it is not about you is one thing that we really look for in people. It's weird. It's like you end up being the center of attention a little and a bit of a lightning rod for what's going on. And I know there's this funny thing in Singapore actually where people always want to look at me as the facilitator, and I keep telling them, don't talk to me, talk to the group. But there's a real habit. It's probably something I have to do around my own practice actually to kind of really downplay myself so that the interaction is with the people in the group and not with me. But sometimes it can be useful. I see the facilitator as a kind of channel and a conduit for what's going on, or even just a pen for hire sometimes. So what is good? What kind of traits makes people good at that? there is a sense of like being able to read the room, read people, understand what's going on, and hopefully that to be kind of intuitive. To this day, I actually don't quite know what makes me a good facilitator, and I'm really bad at training people in facilitation, because what I do is highly intuitive, and people tell me afterwards, like, you've got a really good personality for this, and I'm like, do I? Okay. I mean, I always feel like, I don't know, I often feel guilty as a facilitator, actually. So I think that there's a sense of humility and humbleness that's very important. I think another thing that takes time to develop, but to be a really good facilitator, is you really do need confidence to just fail completely and utterly and be like, right, great, that's part of the process, and to be calm under fire while you fail. I think when I first started facilitating, I had some really bad, like I started off as a terrible facilitator. And I had a few spectacular failures that were very instructive and helped me to learn. And I think that's part of the process of becoming a good facilitator. I think one of the things that I had to learn was to stop trying to control it and stop trying to not make everything my problem. Because you've got a room full of people and it's about them. You are just like, what's the least amount of friction that you can introduce to get them to do something useful? As a facilitator, I think one thing that makes me a bit distinct is I am very outcomes focused, and in some circumstances it makes me not the right person for the job, actually. There are some people as a facilitator who kind of, they actually put a premium on the experience they're creating for the people in it. So it's like, you know, if you're doing something around social policy, they would put a premium on the therapeutic outcomes for the people who are part of that conversation. And there's an aspect of brutality to my facilitation, which is there's an outcome we've got to get to as a group. Do we agree that's what we're trying to do? And yeah, it's just, certainly you don't want to cause harm to people and create a really horrible environment. Like, you want to create a lovely, supportive environment. But at the end of the day, we've got a job to do. And that comes first. When I have clients say, yeah, and can you make it fun? And can you make it like a real like team bonding exercise for us? And I say, you got to make a choice. Do you want me to create an exercise that's more about team bonding and people having a good time? Or do you want to get a job done? And you can do both, but it is a trade-off. So what do you want? There's a key question that I was taught. For successful facilitation, you need to know two things. You need to know why you're doing what you're doing, which comes back to that intent part of design. Because if you know that, everything else is details. Like, if you know why we're doing what we're doing and what kind of outcome we've got to get to, you can be extremely flexible and you can ditch your whole agenda and you can do whatever, as long as you understand how this is getting you to where you need to be by the end. The other critical part of it is knowing, what am I making, or what are we making together, which is kind of a design. Like, if I was a deliberative facilitator, I might not ask that question the same way, because you're really trying to figure out an answer, or you're trying to ventilate views, have a debate, try to kind of get some kind of alignment and a direction. But in design, there's a lot more focus on what's the thing that we're making. So are we creating some kind of framework together? Are we creating some kind of intervention or an idea together? So know why, like what's the outcome, and know what we're trying to make in order to get to that. And that's at a high level. And then it's like every moment as a facilitator in your workshop, it's right now, how does what I'm doing build towards that bigger why? So what's the why of what I'm doing right now? And what am I making right now? You stitch those things together and you get to your higher outcomes. So, you know, that's kind of the ability to be able to keep coming back to why I'm doing what I'm doing is really critical to be a good facilitator. I think also just generally being able to connect dots quickly is really useful as a facilitator, and to not freak out about that. Like, I think actually probably most people can do that more than they realize. I mean, I wasn't lying when I said I think my superpower is to connect dots, even when those dots don't exist. But as a facilitator, a big part of my practice now is, from whatever's going on, to be able to stitch together a narrative or something that makes sense out of that, even if it's wrong, so that people can look at that and go, yeah, no, that's totally where we're going. Yeah, cool, let's keep building that. Or, nah, that is wrong. And I don't mind either. I think another key lesson I was taught by a colleague early on was If you can't get people to do anything productive, just start making shit up and just make it wrong. Just like go, right, guys, I think it's this, right? It's this and this and this. Because then everyone will leap in and be like, no, because you know how people just love to throw stones. So sometimes as facilitators, that's why I say like a facilitator has to be able to be egoless, because you've got to be, sometimes you need to be the bad guy. Sometimes you need to be the dumb one. Like sometimes the best thing you can do is to just appear completely stupid and incompetent in front of people so that they feel like they can jump in and be the hero and be like, oh, come on, let me help you out. I think it's this. And then sometimes it's like, I'll actually just stop halfway and go, okay, guys, this isn't getting us anywhere. Should we just give up? Do you just want to go home? And that can achieve two things. Like if they're like, yeah, we're not prepared for this and we're not in the right headspace and this is not working, let's try again later. Great, good outcome. Sometimes it'll also be like, okay, we actually have to take responsibility for what we're doing as a group. So maybe last lesson on facilitation, I think, is really put the accountability on the people in the room to do the work, and you're just helping them to do that work. So my favorite, it's why one of my favorite methods is the open space methodology, and I know Doug and others in A Good Space are aficionados of that, because it's the ultimate in putting responsibility on the people involved in the conversation. Like literally, it's like, if you're not enjoying the conversation you're in, go to another one. So yeah, there's the big thing as a facilitator about don't waste my time, don't waste your time. If the way we're doing this right now isn't working, then try something else, you know, tempered with a tension of maintaining enough confidence, because the other thing that can happen is people just lose confidence in the process and they just start questioning everything. So sometimes it's like confidence enough to kind of push and be, come on guys, just do it. Let's just try it. Come on, let's give it a go. Let's see where we get to. And they believe you enough to go with it. But also then having the confidence to really go, you know, I think we're at a point where this is not working. So let's pivot. Let's do something else. And that takes a lot of confidence to get to that stage, I think.
The thing that you said, what was the open space concept that you and Doug are aficionados of? What was that?
Open space technology. So it's a book by Harrison Owen. I think that's right. Or Owen Harrison. I'm pretty sure it's Harrison Owen. It's quite old. I think it came around the 90s, maybe even 80s. And it's a unconferences you might have heard of. You know, it's a way of basically running events, running workshops without an agenda. So the participants actually create their own agenda and then they self-facilitate, but there's rules and protocols that make it work. And variants on that I really love them. And the facilitator in those modes becomes almost like a figurehead, like you're almost like this sort of spiritual figure that's embodying like the ethos, and your presence, you don't say anything, but your presence is like a reminder to live the ethos. So Harrison Owen talks about a story of he was doing open space around the Israel and Palestine conflict, and he had like, you know, a bunch of about 1,000 students or something. I'm probably inventing details of the story. But some groups got into some really heated conversations because you've got students from Israel and Palestine talking to each other. And he was just sort of walking around and kind of sensing what was going on. And he sort of saw these two groups that had created spaces out in the lawn and they were kind of getting into it. And he didn't know why, but he just kind of went and sat down like 100 metres away from him. He just kind of sat down and just kind of was just there. And one of the participants came up to him afterward and said, "Thank you so much for what you did." And he said, what did I do? I don't even know. I just felt like it was the right thing to do. I don't know. We just saw you there, and it just sort of reminded us about like how we were supposed to be working, and that made the breakthrough and the difference in our conversation suddenly working. So yeah, facilitation can be all sorts of stuff, and I resist templates at all costs.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Anyone else want to ask a question? Oh, Vincent's here.
Oh, maybe Daniel, I asked Bill a question about fatherhood because he's, you know, a new father. I mean, not so new now, but like, I guess what is one thing you've learned about yourself after becoming a father that you didn't know before?
Probably a recognition that my life has really been about my work. And this is the first time that I'm actually thinking about what my life outside work is. And that's actually pretty tough for me, because I mean, the biggest thing about having a family is what it does to your time. And if you think you've got a busy schedule now, that's nothing compared to what happens when you've got kids, and all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of other stakeholders to disappoint, which is your family and your kids. So someone's always suffering. You're always letting someone down, because obviously, in the kind of as change makers and wanting to do cool stuff, our ambitions are potentially unlimited, but our ability to deliver on them is absolutely finite, and parenthood makes it even more finite. But what do we learn about ourselves? I think we learn a whole lot about our capacity to love and what that means, and it's also suddenly makes real a whole bunch of those future concerns, because you've got a group to look out for. To be honest, I think fatherhood, my whole attitude towards it is really thinking about what kind of gifts and tools I can give to my son, and now my second son in October, and like what gifts and tools can we give to them so that they can go on and do whatever it is that they want to do. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you.
We've got time for just one more question. I'm going to take my, I wouldn't call myself a facilitator in this, but I would just like to take my moderator's prerogative and ask you this question. So one of the reasons why I invited you to this weekly dialogues, I hope that our members can get to know you better and maybe work with you on something together. So if a member were to approach you, what kind of project or something, what would interest you to work together with another member?
So we do have a limitation. So the platform that I get to work from is really interesting and awesome, but at the end of the day, we're a for-profit company. It's not our reason for existence, but it's how we ensure sustainability and that we can scale in what we do. So that limits. I've done a lot of pro bono work in my time, and the burnout that can come from that, plus my day job, I have to be really careful about that. And then fatherhood and all of that other stuff. I'd flip it around and actually say, I think there's probably opportunities. We're always on the lookout for extended network of facilitators for the kind of work that we do, and we can give training and opportunities along with that, particularly around language. So Malay, Tamil, Mandarin, potentially other languages as well. We have quite a big demand for that kind of thing, and for the people who are really committed to want to work with us as facilitators, I think we can offer a lot of training and development to fulfill that. But this is real work. So there's a limit to how much that can be a training opportunity versus like they've actually got to be good facilitators, because people are paying for them. But I think that's one thing that we'd love to work more with the membership base in A Good Space around. The other one is around community networks. And it's always about finding and getting trusted access to all of the different diverse sectors of the Singapore community quickly to engage them in design. I think, ThinkPlace and A Good Space, the difference between, the groups, I think, is we really are kind of coming more from the government side a lot of the time. We started off, we came out of the Australian Tax Office originally, so that was our origin, was like citizen centricity in the taxation system. And we've become increasingly broad, but we are sort of a trusted partner of governments, and that creates a lot of opportunities and affordances for them letting us do stuff that they probably honestly wouldn't let A Good Space do yet, because most people in A Good Space are advocates and activists and change makers. We're not activists. We are independent brokers, and our neutrality and our trusted neutrality is really important. Now, for some people in a good space, that's probably where you are too. But for some people in a good space, rightfully, you should be an activist. You should be pushing for change, and you should be driving that. So, I guess it just sort of tells you a little bit about the kind of the difference of where we play and what we do. But we would love to team up. Like, I think activists and people who are promoting and driving change and are plugged into communities, we can bring them into design processes we're involved in. It's not just government. It's a lot of sustainability, private sector stuff now as well. It's changing all sorts of systems. So there's all sorts of the thing that's really cool about the work we do is like we've got a finger in everything. And sometimes we go mad because there's just too many different use cases we're working on. But what that allows us to do is connect together. Like you want to be able to connect the board, like the chair of that company, with someone like, a director who has regulatory responsibility for that, with a community leader in that space, with some kind of, with a ground level, like a nurse who's like at the coalface of some health problem. Well, actually, that's something we can probably do. And then we can find the innovation opportunity in that. So I think we'd love to work more with the Good Space members in like really being able to plug into the community and create that serendipity and connect those dots.
So if I were to say a possible process would be, say, an activist within a good space could maybe have a sympathetic ear of somebody in the government, and they want to bring, and then the government can be interested in convening the different parties together, and you can get ThinkPlace to come and help facilitate that. Would that be somewhat like that?
Yeah, I think often we're creating the right conditions where bureaucrats can be comfortable enough to really relax in a room with activists and people pushing an agenda, and actually have a decent common sense conversation about that. And it's like, we're really trying to kind of coach and work on people at each end to find the space in the middle. I mean, I don't think that's too different to what A Good Space is doing with the living labs as well. So it's not necessarily unique, but I think a big part of what we're doing is working behind the scenes with our government clients to just open them up more and more, to take more steps and open up more space and go a little bit further each time. We've worked with MSF for 2 years, and what we were allowed to do with them 2 years ago is very different to what we're doing with them today and where we're going with them next. There's a saying, it's moving at the speed of trust. We're really trying to lead a lot of our government sector clients to engage with more trust.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. We've come to the end of our Q&A segment, and thank you, Bill, so much for making the time to answer our questions and letting us get to know you a bit better as well as your work and your fatherhood. We hope that by listening to you, some of our audience members, whether those present here today or those watching this recording right now, will want to reach out to you and explore possible collaborations with you. So now we go to the last segment of this session, which is called the Chat with GM. We can end the recording now.